Hello again, everybody. We are continuing with our reading of the lectures from John Wilson on the mission of Eliyahu to restore all before the advent of Yahushua Mashiach. And this is lecture number 5. It's subtitled From What Were All Yisrael or Israel to Be Recovered? And the notes for the title here. Sorry, that was the title, and this is the subtitle. It's Recovery of All Israel from Under the Feet of the Great Image. And I've never read this before, but he mentions the same things that I've been saying for a few years now about the clay being the people mixed with the iron of Rome. And I've never heard anyone else talking about that. So I find that to be encouraging. I'm not the only one that have seen the what scripture says and have come to that same conclusion. If you know of any other writings from believers in any time that talks about that same part, feel free to share because I've never seen it, but it is interesting to learn. So thank you. Either way, Yisrael's connection with idolatry in the latter days predicted. And if you recall, the latter days began when our Mashiach was there. When you keep in mind the creation week that we've talked about, the 22 works in 6,000 years that he's doing before the millennial reign, that's a week. And the latter days are the latter days of that week, the fourth, fifth, and sixth days, respectively, to which he came, and it was the advent of. But we'll continue. Deuteronomy 31:29, the wafer, it says Holy Father, the rock, Deuteronomy 32:43, and Romans 15:10, the epistle to the Romans, not addressed to the Bishop of Rome. It either ignores or directly opposes the doctrine called Roman, warns against the assumptions of Rome, quote, be not high-minded, unquote, quote, he that exalteth himself, unquote, from 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 4. The leaven existed in the apostolic assembly, quote, he that letteth, unquote, and that's the Latin power, which this again is something I don't know where he derived his information from, but he may have had the same resources that were available to us on this topic, which is the ante-Nicene writings. And in that, he may not have been familiar, but in those writings, it clearly mentions that the one that was letting was the pagan, Roman Empire. Until they were removed out of the way, the little horn would not be able to rise to power, temporal power, which is exactly what happened in the course of history. It says the state of social relations under popery, parents and children, the pastors and people, ruler and subject, the desperate evil of priestcraft and intolerance, in producing infidelity and want of social confidence. Our very different position as having a free good news and liberty of profession, evils of priestly interference and celibacy. Quote, come out of her, my people, unquote. And for everyone that, just to recap, we have many videos that cover different topics about this phenomenon in scripture. But Rome is spiritually known as Edom, the daughter of Babel, the Kasdim or the Kittim, not the Kasdim, forgive me on that one. All right. And they all have different connotations for different parts of scripture. It's from the Dead Sea Scrolls, the book of Gad the Seer, the Psalms. Throughout the Psalms, it talks about what Edom, spiritually, the daughter of Edom, and things of that nature. And that's all talking about Rome and specifically when it's Edom, it's Rome in her papal power, where she born in the same womb as her brother Jacob, or as his brother Jacob, but persecuting him. All Yisrael, or all Israel, we have identified with the Alemanni, with those nations which soon after the commencement of the Nazarene dispensation began to make reprisals upon the Roman Empire, and at length became intermingled with the Roman iron in the feet of the great image, of which Babylon was the golden head. Daniel 2, verse 38. Ultimately, a separation was to take place, and it was to be found that they did not cleave one to another, quote, even as iron does not mix with miry clay, unquote. That people who, when connected with the feet of the great image, resembled the miry clay, were to be gathered to the stone cut out of the mountain without hands. That's also in Daniel and in a vision of fourth Ezra. In Genesis 49:24, Yaakov in baraking or blessing Yahusuf says, quote, from thence the shepherd, the stone of Yisrael, unquote. Yahushua, who is the living stone, was not personally of Yahusuf, but the son of Jacob, or was not personally of Yahusuf, the son of Jacob, but his type was. Yahushua, the son of Nun, was of Ephraim. So that was the physical pointing to the spiritual right here, right? But the filling up of his body, the assembly, is of this people. Ever since the period of the Reformation, the cause of Mashiach has become more and more identified with the Saxon race, which we identify as descended from Yahusuf's younger son, Ephraim, unto whom was promised the inheritance of blessing actually bestowed upon us. And um, Ephraim was generally the Angles. They said predominantly the Angle was the bull, and the bull was Ephraim. The Saxons were the sons of Isaac or Yitzhak, which was a name that was given to the sons of Yahusuf to use, whether it be Ephraim or Manasseh. And you find the use of Saxons, Saxony, Wessex, Essex, Sussex in both England and America, and every place that these people have gone. So, you can't just identify it with Ephraim, but that's not a big deal. Unto whom was promised the inheritance of Baraka or blessing actually bestowed upon us. At length, all Yisrael is to be claimed for Yahuwah. The call is to be heard, quote, come out of her, my people, unquote. Revelation, what was that? 15, 18, sorry, 4. Let this call be obeyed, and all that remains of the great image will be only, quote, as the chaff of the summer threshing floors, unquote. Daniel 2:35. And when you look at all the foretellings in regard to this, Baruch with the waters and the vine, with the foretellings about who is the responsible party or peoples who rise up against every adversary of his children and correct them, you'll find that when the people repent, they're the ones that are going to be doing this, right? They'll be as ashes at the hills of your feet in that day, as it mentions. The degradation to which all Yisrael sank, as in the mire, under the feet of the great image. And if you recall, sorry if you can hear the dogs barking. But if you recall, the first reference that I'm aware of the use of the miry clay in the feet was with Julius in the book of Taffy, when Yirmiyahu was taking the daughter of Zadik Yahu from Egypt over to Ireland. They had had a stop in Italy or Rome, and they had captured Julius of the line or of the line of Julius, the future Caesars there, and his feet in sandals were in miry clay as an image of things like that. But he's actually a son of Yahuda, as you know, of the paganized Trojans that came over. Right? We've covered all of that, but that's a little bit of the history in regard to this. You see these images and patterns, first physical, literal, then spiritual, right? Same thing, even if it's not directly in what we call the Bible, it's the same pattern though. Excuse me. Another reference to that is if you look at the apocryphal writings, the book of, or the additions to Daniel, as they're called, one of them is Bel and the dragon. And he literally helps to destroy the physical image of Baal and a literal physical dragon that is worshipped. And these are, physical representations of what will happen later on spiritually. I'm hoping that we can start seeing that pattern. It plays out in every case that way, as far as I'm aware. First, the physical, literal in the land, then the spiritual. When he gave the added bonds for transgression, it was for that very purpose. All and the dietary laws, as far as I'm aware, were given at that time, but they've never been changed. And it mentions in the Apostolic Constitution that some have not. What we have to do is look through the scriptures that we have and discern what is his will and intent for our age and times, because it's all here. He tells us what he wants us to do. He tells us what he wants us to stop. He does it in every age and time for the people and places that he wills. It's not hard for us. And before he's going to return, we have to get back to being his body in the world as it's enumerated in the Apostolic Constitutions. And as John Wilson here is trying to enumerate or elucidate, sorry, with these lectures about the restoration of all the work of Eliyahu, or my El is Yahuwah. But to continue here, it says, the degradation to which all Yisrael sank, as in the mire under the feet of the great image, even so as to become incorporated therewith, seems to have been foretold not only by the latter foretellers, but even so early as the time of the Exodus, having forewarned them of their grievous backslidings. Moshe says, Deuteronomy 31:29, quote, evil will befall you in the latter days, because you will do evil in the sight of Yahuwah to provoke him to anger through the work of your hands. Unquote. This, as we have elsewhere remarked, cannot refer to the people called Jews or Yahudim, who, since their return from Babylon, have not been accused of idolatry, the sin referred to by Moshe. The prediction is respecting all Yisrael. At the time they came into Western Europe, they were heathen idolaters. Upon the breaking up of the Roman Empire, they became identified with corrupt Christianity, and for centuries subsequently, they were idolaters in every sense, worshiping not only images as memorials of spiritual objects, but as in the case of the consecrated wafer, worshiping the work of men's hands as if it were really Elohim. If the wafer being given supreme worship, as in the Mass, it is but little wonder that the master of the makers of these idols that the Bishop of Rome, who gives the power of making them, should himself be worshipped. And this, as we shall see, is literally the case. I don't know if you knew it at the time, but they literally call him the Lordgod, the Pope. They say that in their titles and their singing accolades to him. That a direct reference to the assumptions of the papacy is made in the Song of Moshe, Deuteronomy 32, will, I think, appear evident to those who truly believe that Moshe spake not of himself, but as moved by the set apart Ruach. In opposition to the claim that the Bishop of Rome to the title of Holy Father, Moshe says, verse 6, quote, "Is not he your father that has brought you? Has he not made you and established you?" Unquote. Pontifex Maximus, the pagan high priest at Rome, has long claimed to be also the successor of Saint Peter, who they say was the prince of the apostles, and identical with the rock upon which the assembly was to be built. In opposition to all such assumptions, we have in the Song of Moshe, verse 3, quote, "Because I will publish the name of Yahuwah, ascribe you greatness unto our Elohim. He is the rock, his work is perfect, for all his ways are judgment, an El of truth and without inequity, righteous and straight or upright is he." How very different this character in every particular from that of the pretended successor of St. Peter. In verse 15, Yeshurun is reproached with having lightly esteemed the rock of his salvation. The true Father has been too much forgotten in favor of the fabricator of false mighty ones. Verse 18, "Of that rock that begot you, you are unmindful, and have forgotten Elohim that formed you." Unquote. The great evils under which we long lay, as having put our trust in the creature, are afterwards referred to when it is said, verses 30, 31, quote, "How should one chase 1,000, and two put 10,000 to flight, except their rock had sold them, and Yahuwah had shut them up? For their rock is not as our rock, even our enemies themselves being judges." Unquote. By the decline and ruin of every kingdom or state most characterized by devotion to Rome and trust in the patronage of any other mighty one, or any other than Elohim, occasion has often been given to say, verse 37, quote, "Where are their mighty ones, their rock in whom they trusted?" Unquote. The conclusion of this song is very remarkable, especially when we observe that it is pointedly referred to in Saint Shaul or Paul's epistle to the Romans. And when we remember that the Romans were the people with whom all Yisrael were to be so long intermingled, compare Deuteronomy 32:43 with Romans 15, verse 10. Quote, "Rejoice, O you nations, with his people, for he will avenge the blood of his servants, and will render vengeance to his adversaries, and will be merciful unto his land and to his people." Unquote. The epistle to the Romans points plainly to the salvation or restoration of all Yisrael, and is well fitted to assist in the good work, as it actually did at the period of the Reformation. At that crisis, the Church of Rome, addressed by the Apostle, chapter 9, verse 17, as the wild olive which had been grafted into the good olive tree, was by the Council of Trent utterly separated therefrom, and the natural branches, the nations which had come of Jacob, and especially those of the Saxon race, were grafted into their own olive tree again. They had the scriptures translated into their vernacular tongues, and these, especially the English, showed a remarkable adaptation for this set apart service. Of the right, not only of these our nations, but even of, quote, all that be in Rome, unquote, to a free access to the words of Elohim, we have a full recognition in the epistle of the Romans. This epistle is not addressed to the Bishop of Rome or to his clergy, as if he or they alone were the dispositories and dispensers of the oracles of Elohim. It ignores the very existence of the Bishop of Rome and the whole of his clergy. And I'll go even further. When you have the response of Clement to the Corinthians after the emissaries are dead, and you have First Clement to the Corinthians, he doesn't even write of himself in any position of as a dignitary in anything, as the head of anyone in any capacity in that it's done in the same form of humility as the rest of the letters are. Excuse me. It says not a word in favor of the doctrines now called Roman, such as the worship of the Virgin or of the wafer. The epistle to the Nazarene at Rome says not a word in favor of baptismal regeneration, private confession to a priest, purgatory, indulgences, or transubstantiation. But it is emphatic upon the debasing tendency of idolatry and the danger of celibacy. See chapter 1. It is most explicit upon the great Protestant doctrine of justification by faith. See chapter 3, and etc. And upon good works as springing from a participation of the goodness of Elohim in Mashiach Yahushua, chapter 12, and etc. Rome is not the stalk of that tree, of which other assemblies are the branches. It is expressly warned against any such assumption. The stream of mercy had to pass through Rome on its way to the people to whom it was more especially sent. But Rome was not to take occasion from thence to boast, as if she were the fountainhead. The Roman assembly was not to call itself, quote, the mother and mistress of all churches, unquote. She was not to glory over the natural branches as if they were hers. The Roman church did not bear the root, but if it belonged to the tree at all, was born by the root. Chapter 11, 8, verse 18. In opposition to their boasted Catholicity, the Church of Rome is shown to be but a part, and against their claim to infallibility, they are faithfully warned that if they did not continue in Yahuwah's Tovim or goodness, they also should be cut off. Verse 22. And the natural branches among whom Eliyahu had ministered were, as not continuing in unbelief, to be grafted into their own olive tree again. The Romans are but little to be thanked for our possession of Nazarene, the belief, right? As long as they could, the Romans did their utmost to extinguish the belief. And when they could not accomplish this, they made strenuous and persevering efforts. Even to this day, the Counter-Reformation's in full effect, especially in our nation. They're still working for it, right? To make it a means of obtaining earthly gain and worldly domination. In the meantime, they corrupted it so as to make it a curse rather than a blessing to the nations. But whatever mountains of difficulty, and this would have been mentioned in the odes of Shalomo, as the bridegroom that corrupts and is corrupted, and the bride who is corrupted. Sorry. They are the deceivers in the world, and they usurp the place of the bride and the bridegroom, it mentions. But in the meantime, they corrupted it so as to make it a curse rather than a baraka, a blessing to the nations. But whatever mountains of difficulty Rome might place in the way, the blessing of Yisrael was to overpass them all, in order to, quote, come upon the head of Yahusuf, upon the crown of the head of him that was separate from his brethren, unquote. Genesis 49:26. Rome, meaning great or high, and that's in the Hebrew. So you see, he's doing the same thing that I've talked about. Rome means to be Rom, to be exalted or high and lifted up. To be clever in Hebrew is Iram or Eram, to perceive what is high and exalted or great and lifted up. But and we've mentioned those before, that's why I just brought it up now. He does the same thing here, and this is part of the truth is reality. Things are called what they are for a purpose, and Yahuwah is sovereign. But that's why the enemy has gone through and tried to change the meanings of things or the words used throughout history. You can look at crossbow for a great example. Until the printing of the Bible in the vernacular tongues of the common people, it was called a scorpion. And the scorpions being used by those people on horses that were like locusts were very easy to see as the Byzantine army and the Roman armies from the times of our Mashiach all the way until they were destroyed by the Mongols who came through with firearms.
Which
And
and brother, we get that in, you know, and I had never heard that. I mean, obviously I've read, Hazon or Revelation, but we get that in the Apostolic Constitution, which I really love how it broke that down. I mean, not that. I'm sorry,
yeah,
Antichrist. Yeah, Anti-Mashiach.
yes. Sorry, brother, didn't mean to cut you off. You're right. The Antichrist for Dummies, the Anti-Mashiach for Dummies video series. It's where you get generally the proper interpretation and the historical meaning of what happened in Revelation all the way up to our times and even beyond them. Although um, you have to take that with a grain of salt because we are prone to mistakes. So um, I think those videos do a great job, and in this instance, they're absolutely spot on. The meanings of those foretellings, the fulfillment of them, the math and how it all works out. He lays out everything plainly so that you can do it yourself, follow along, and see how it actually works. But thank you for reminding me, brother, about the name of the video or the video series there. It says Rome, meaning great or high, is a name appropriate enough to a city claiming that universal dominion, grasped at by the proud builders of Babylon. To the Roman assembly, and remember that one world order under Babel, where they're building the tower, that's what we're working towards with this one world order that they're all talking about with part of this new age thing that's going on. Different uses and means and terminologies all working to the same effect, bringing universal world dominion back or to Rome. And this is going to continue until the people collectively repent. To the Roman assembly or church, even so early as apostolic times, and before having a recognized head upon earth, it was said, Romans 11:20, quote, be not high-minded, but fear, unquote. And again, 13 verse 3, quote, for I say through the grace given unto me, that every man that is among you ought not or not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think soberly, according as Elohim has dealt to every man the measure of belief. Unquote. From this, it would appear that the apostle had special grace directing him to write to the Nazarene at Rome, warning them against self-exaltation or the assumption of spiritual power, otherwise than according as Elohim was pleased to deal to every man the measure of belief. It would have been easy for Shaul to tell the Romans that Elohim had put the matter out of his own hands, and that Mashiach, the proper head of the assembly, had made the overseer of Rome his vicar, had such been the case. But the little horn is not at all recognized in Shaul's epistle to the Romans, and where Shaul does, in his epistles, mention Kepha or Peter, the supposed first bishop of Rome, it is as giving an example of resisting him openly and resolutely because of his acting inconsistently with the truthful confession of the great Protestant doctrine of justification by faith. Galatians 2:11 through 21. The man of Rome, or in other words, he that exalteth himself, is very strikingly described by the same apostle in 2 Thessalonians 2:1 through 3. See, the man of Rome, the one that's exalted and lifted up, right? And that's what he's using the name's meaning as another example of what was described openly right here, that he that exalts himself. Here, he first speaks of the confusion out of which the man of sin was to arise. Quote, now we beseech you, brethren, by or concerning the coming of our Yahuwah Yahushua Mashiach, and our gathering together unto him, that you be not soon shaken in mind, or be troubled, neither by ruach, nor by word, nor by letter, as from us, as that the day of Mashiach is at hand. Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that the man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition. Unquote. A title given to the traitor Yahuda Ish Kiriot, or the man of the city. Yahukinon 17, verse 12. The apostolic prototype of the man of Rome having been pointed out, there immediately, and remember, he used to be a thief and steal what was meant for the poor. That was the prototype. Says, pointed out, there immediately follows a paraphrase upon the name Roman or exalted. Quote, or 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 4, when he against whom the assembly was to be more especially on her guard is described as, quote, he that exalteth himself above all that is called Elohim or that is worshipped, unquote. And this is literally the case. The little horn being at his very installation given as his footstool, the throne of all that they call Elohim, and which they worship as such. The wafer used in the sacrament is by the words of consecration transubstantiated, as they say, into the body, blood, soul, and divinity of our Mashiach, which is blasphemy. But I'm not going to use that title or actually put his name to such a thing, so please forgive me. And it is that which in the Mass receives the most devout worship of the Roman Church. It ordinarily, sorry, its ordinary place of enthronement is the altar, but even the high altar of St. Peter's at Rome, in the most public manner, and before all the cardinals uncovered and kneeling, and while the Te Deum is being sung, Te Deum, sorry, is made the footstool of the little horn. he sitting there crowned above all. An English Roman Catholic priest, Est, no, Estes, upon describing this grand display of pontifical pride, exclaims, quote, "But wherefore make the throne of El his footstool?" Unquote. For faulting an act so characteristic of the little horn, it was not likely that Estace's classical tour of Italy would escape the Index Purgatorius, meaning it was collected up and burned and banned. The warning against, quote, him that exalteth himself, unquote, was not a matter of casual mention. It was earnest and repeated, even so early as the days of the apostle. Quote, remember you not, unquote, says he, verse 5, quote, that when I was yet with you, I told you these things. And now you know that and now you know what withholdeth, that he might be revealed in his time. For the mystery of iniquity does already work. Only he who now letteth will let until he be taken out of the way. Unquote. Already the spirit of anti-Mashiach was latent in the assembly. Already there was striving for the mastery, or at least a loving to have the preeminence among the brethren. Now, if you want to see the hidden history behind these things, if you really want to get into it, I encourage you to do two things. One, get the Ante-Nicene writings, it's a 10-volume set, and read it. Read them to comprehend them. And when you get what it's saying, watch the Antichrist for Dummies and the history behind what happened during that time. And you can see why it's so perverted from the truth. Some of it's gold and some of it's garbage. And you like, why? What is going on here? That explains it. But you can look at the four Besora, the good news accounts of what he walked out in the flesh, and see the very same thing foretold in parable. But they go over specifically in the Antichrist for Dummies the infiltration of the Nicolaitans and how they hijacked the assembly at Rome, at Antioch, and I think one other place, and from there poisoned the rest of them in the course of time through the Roman code by the force of the Roman law. Excuse me. In due time, the seat heretofore accompanied by the Roman emperor was to be left vacant, and the offices of heathen high priest and Christian bishop or Nazarene bishop were to become one. The pretensions of the kahuna, this very thing was foretold with the white horse rider coming and being crowned. In the first instance, it was when Vespasian came to power. And the next time you see that sign in the stars was when Sylvester, the Bishop of Rome, went to Constantine and was given the crown. And then Constantine went to the east in Byzantine, and he stayed in the west there. That was before they were given complete temporal power, but that was the buddings of it. The pretensions of the priesthood brought from Babylon were to be united to those of the so-called Prince of the Apostles. The supreme arbiter in spiritual matters was to become also an earthly king. Quote, and then shall that wicked be revealed, whom Yahuwah shall consume with the ruach of his mouth, and shall destroy with the brightness of his coming. Unquote. As before in 2 Thessalonians 4 or 2:4, there seemed to be a paraphrase upon the name of the man of Rome, or, quote, he that exalteth himself, unquote. So here appears to follow a paraphrase upon the name of the community, i.e., the Latin meaning that which is latent or hidden. Its working was in secret, as the emissary's days, but it was afterward to be revealed. The word Latin from lateo appears to be from the Hebrew word used in reference to the tricks or enchantments of the Egyptian magicians. See Exodus 7, verse 11 and 22, and chapters 8, verses 7 and 18. So the Hebrew word lateo is the word that's used for the tricks of the or the enchantments of the Egyptian magicians.
So I have a
And that,
question. The word, magician, did that come from? I mean, if you think Egyptian and magician, do you think those have any connection?
oh no, sorry, brother. As far as I know, those are completely unrelated. We say Egyptian today because Egyptus, one of the brothers that had been there, kicked out his brother and took over, and it was named after him, or he was the brother that left and it was named from him from the information he gave. I can't remember which way that was.
Right. Which of course, I know the Hebrew for you know
It-
for
yeah,
but Egyptian magicians. I'm like, man, that TIAN, with this, I don't know. It's just something that popped into my head.
yeah, the Egyptian is Greek though.
Right. Okay. Right.
Right here it says magicians. And the Magi come from Iran, the Persian Empire too. Ha-Magus was known in the Clementine writings. So that word's been around for a while. I have to look into the etymology for that one. I don't know.
Yeah, like Simon Magus.
Yes, exactly so. But I just find it interesting. Latin, the word being for hidden, and the language that they used was originally what they would use for pagan worship in the land there, and it was the Latin language that it became. It was the hidden one. So that connected meeting with the Hebrew perfectly makes sense when you know that Latin is an amalgamation of Hebrew or the Hebrew, Greek mixed with the indigenous people that were there, the sons of Japheth that were already in that area. Right here it says magicians are thought to have the power of, quote, letting, unquote, in both senses, the one diametrically opposite to the other, viz., keeping, covering up, or concealing the natural state of things, and also of, quote, letting, unquote, them or allowing them to appear or operate. Magicians are also supposed to have the power of producing that which is expressed in the Greek word, probably derived from the same root, leth, meaning oblivion or stupor. And again, when you know the Hebrew, Greek, Latin connection, all of these things are definitely related. He might not have been as familiar, but since his time, there were many books written, many writings, essays, and books on the topic, even into our age, about the connections between these languages. They haven't been known as well in all times, but the fact that it was known and it is out there is freely available, as far as I know, still to this point. I have these books available in PDF form on my phone. I've bought some that are available that you can online. Um,
I'm going to look on YouTube to see if there's the anti-Nicene writings at all on YouTube. Maybe somebody's gone through that because I found a lot of stuff. But because I'm one who likes to listen. But no, the PDFs are great. But at the same
you
time, for those that just listen, oh yeah.
right. You'll find them. There's even some people that are trying to be practitioners of it today, and they have their own version of the apostolic constitutions that they'll read too, at least that. So
I've seen one lady who went through. Well, she she didn't cover it all, but she tried to cover a lot of it.
mhm. I believe these people were a branch of Greek Orthodox of some kind, but I didn't watch the videos very much. I usually read right here. Leith, the meaning of living or stupor, in which state what was deposited in the mind is hidden. The enchanted person sees and thinks and speaks and acts only as the enchanter lets him. The Latin power, which was to arise when the emperor should be withdrawn from Rome, is characterized by, quote, the working of Satan, unquote. The same enmity to the truth and the servants of, or and to the servants of Elohim, which had been abundantly manifested in the heathen imperial power, was to appear in him who was thereafter to be developed in this, the western branch of the empire, who was to carry on the work of Satan, not professedly, but, quote, with all power and signs and lying wonders, and with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish, because they received not the love of the truth that they might be delivered, unquote. Those who are in a selfish, deceiving spirit must not hope to have the truth of Elohim made known to them. Such are prepared for falling under the power of the sorcerer. And we've talked about it before, just to tie all these things together. The church is the word from the word circe, Kirk. Circe is the female patroness of Rome, the daughter of Apollo, Apollyon the destroyer, their patron, mighty one that they serve from Revelation. And she's known for turning men through sorcery and enchantment into pigs.
Which also isn't that where the word circus comes from?
Yes, and the church. It, the games and the circus and entertainment is what they use to enchant or distract, detain the mind for these
And
very purposes.
and there's always a ringleader
Mhm.
trying to tame the lions.
Right. Having fallen from the faith and ceased to depend upon the one atoning sacrifice and all prevailing intercession of our great high Kohen, Mashiach Yahushua, having fallen from this, the one foundation, to a dependence upon priestly acts and intentions, Elohim allows their foolishness to become pallidly manifest, so that reason may become startled, and men may, by their very senses, be assured that error is being taught, and delusion practiced, and that repentance and reformation are called for. Quote, and for this cause Elohim shall send them strong delusion, that they should believe a lie, unquote. And it need scarcely be remarked that of all lies, that which they have substituted for the one sacrifice of our Master, or our Yahuwah, and for the whole worship of Elohim, the sacrifice and worship of a wafer, is the most consummate. It is that which occasions their being condemned, not only by the apostles and foretellers, but by all who exercise common sense in the matter. Quote, that they all might be damned who believed not the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness, unquote. And if you want to know why you believe a delusion, it's because of your heart condition for what you're doing. You got to be careful with that and repent. The glaring falsehood that a piece of paste is, by the words of consecration, changed into the very El-Man, Mashiach Yahushua, that this seen to be a wafer is to be given the most solemn worship due to El alone, that it is to be offered up as an acceptable sacrifice for the sins of the living and the dead, and as being Yahuwah Yahushua, all right, as being our word made flesh, to be swallowed whole and entire day after day by the worshippers. The like of this for absurdity and daring in piety we may scarcely expect to find among even heathen idolaters. The intention of the Kohen to sacrifice Mashiach to be paid for, or had to be paid for, and the making payment for this purpose was reckoned among the most meritorious of good works, as well as accounted as an atonement for bad ones, so that a man might live in sinful pleasure and dying, leave the residue of his property to purchase a release from the pains of purgatory, and which pains, supposing him to have been a poor man, or more regardful of his lawful heirs, he must continue to suffer. Those of the young, emphatically called, quote, the religious, unquote, are selfishly seeking what they suppose to be their own soul's good, refuse to smooth the bed of sickness at home, or be a stay and comfort to declining age. They shut themselves up in convents, and now we put our old people in them, right? Where they were utterly cut off from the performance of duty in the natural relationships. So far from their hearts being turned to their fathers, it was their supposed duty to be, quote, without natural affection, unquote. The pastors of the people were of those who thus professed themselves religious, who, by the commandments of the church or min code, were bound to display or disobey the laws of Elohim. Such could be no proper example to others, as husbands and fathers, although according to the apostolic precept, the pastors of the assemblies ought to be so. In regard to verbal instruction, they were about as much a wanting as in the practice of the domestic virtues, having been accustomed to exercise their minds on subjects and in a language foreign to the common understanding. They had nearly as little to do with the heads as with the right guidance of the hearts of their people. So far from encouraging mental progress, they made it their business to prevent free thought and to stir up all sorts of opposition to the diffusion of knowledge on subjects the most important. The people could scarcely be expected to love such teachers. However, they might fear them. It was easier for them to hate or ignorantly oppose and persecute unto the death, as they often did, those who could and would have communicated unto them the words of life freely. Rulers were taught not so much to be a terror unto evildoers as to those that sought, at the risk of their lives, to benefit society. Magistrates were the executioners of unrighteous sentences, pronounced by their ghostly superiors upon those who dared to think for themselves, and especially upon those who endeavored to emancipate society from the degrading mental bondage in which it was held. The child was encouraged to betray the parent, and the parent the child, the wife the husband, and the husband the wife, the master the servant, and the servant the master. Mutual confidence was destroyed. Each was obliged to profess belief in that which, if he had eyes to see, he must have been to be emphatically, or he must have seen to be emphatically a lie, and yet he dared not whisper a doubt to his most familiar friend. He must be isolated in thought, even from those nearest and dearest to him. The individual might thus, from his own consciousness, be led to suppose that all others were false. And this is why you might start realizing this is why we are seeing an erosion in the trust in the institutions of our popular government so that we can see that there is no truth or justice, there's no right, evil's prospering, and the good get punished, right? For the very same purpose here, to disillusion the people. But there's a higher than high. If you believe his word to be true, Ecclesiastes says, when you see those suffering in such a way, remember there's a higher than high. There is a reason that these things are happening. In the persecuted Albigenses and Waldenses, there was indeed something like truth. But he would be apt to ask, can these be right and all the world in the wrong? If there is an L, and these poor men really on his side, is it possible that he would so give them up into the hands of their enemies? And the little horn would overcome the set apart ones for a time. It was foretold to happen, and it actually did in history. Because his body represented, he said, everyone perfected will be as his master. And if he was dead, then all those perfected were the martyrs during this time. If these were the set apart ones of the Most High, would he allow a monster of cruelty and falsehood to wear them out thus and to cover them up in obliquity, in obscurity, right? As if they were the proper objects of hatred on the part both of Elohim and man. If there be an El, how is it possible that he can allow these, his witnesses, to lie in a state of destruction thus for ages? And this is not knowing that the Chaldeans were a righteous remnant for a very long time that weren't persecuted for quite some time. And they were in what we call Scotland today. So men, ignorant of the prophetic scriptures, might reason until they were entirely bewildered. When people have lost confidence in Elohim and in each other, they can make but little real progress in science, the Dark Ages, or in the practical application thereof for great social improvements. Men must be drawn to the truth and be given a truthful spirit in order to be recovered to Elohim and to each other. And we had this started at the Reformation, but it was not brought to perfection. It was perverted, and we have backslidden yet again. We who, out of the rich mercy of Elohim and Mashiach Yahushua, are presented with the pardon of sin and the gift of eternal life, and who are thence directed to go and manifest our gratitude to Elohim by the exercise of forgiveness and forbearance, and by doing tov to all as we have opportunity, we who are accustomed freely to inquire and to openly discuss according to our honest convictions, we, bad as we are, can scarcely conceive of the amount of selfishness and falsehood and folly which pass for religion, and of the deadly, darkening skepticism which broods over almost every thinking mind. Where the man of sin is dominant and the right of private judgment is disallowed. There, every man is a kind of alien even to his brother. Under the Inquisition, he dared not make a confidant of the wife that lay in his bosom, for the priest had more of her confidence. Her husband might have some legal claim to the possession of her body, but the priest had the keeping of her soul. The abominations which result from celibacy and the judgment of Elohim upon idolaters were not wanting, and equally present were the suspicion, jealousy, and all uncharitableness, the vices of which the Apostle Shaul speaks when pointing out the mischiefs that befell those who do not like to retain Elohim in their knowledge. Romans chapter 1. The three great departments of man's duty are what we owe to Elohim, to ourselves, and to our neighbor. And the apostle there shows that those who transgress in the first respect, Romans 1:21 through 23, are punished by being allowed to fall into the other two. Personal uncleanness, verses 24 through 27, and social deformity, verses 28 through 32. Deformity, they call pride today. The price paid for idolatry and for those gross violations of nature, which prevail throughout the whole Romish system, was that corruption which corroded to the very core every nation thoroughly Latinized, and lying in the arms of that wicked one. From all these abominations, spiritual and physical, into which the nations we identify with all Yisrael have been allowed to fall in the latter days, they were at length to be turned back, as has been to some extent the case with the Protestant nations, and chiefly those of Anglo-Saxon origin. But very much indeed remains to be done in obedience to the apocalyptic call. Quote, "Come out of her, my people, that you be not partakers of her sins, and that you receive not of her plagues," like the bull judgments that have been poured out since the turn of the 20th century. Revelation 18, verse 4. This very call implies that those who more especially constitute the people of Elohim under the new covenant dispensation have been in Babylon, and that it is their duty to come out of it. And both of these facts are clearly recognized by the name already borne by so many of the Anglo-Saxon race, Protestants, which is from the word protestari, which means to witness, right? They are witnesses for the truth of El against the errors, idolatry, evil practices, oppression, and unscriptural assumptions of the papacy. The call is to be still more obeyed. Zechariah 2:7, quote, "Deliver thyself, O Zion, that dwells with the daughter of Babylon," unquote. I mentioned the daughter of Babylon was a title for Rome. Okay. And verse 11, quote, "And many nations shall be joined to Yahuwah in that day, and shall be my people," unquote. It is Yahuwah of glory calls. Let his Yisrael hear. Stop, you revolters, in your course, and hearken and come near. What you in sin's delusive paths, or sorry, what though in sin's delusive paths you from your youth have strayed, what though my messengers of love have been with scorn repaid? At last return, and grace divine, your wanderings shall forget, and the stone of destiny, they call it, the stone that is underneath the throne that the monarchs of Europe are crowned crowned upon. It mentions that whoever wherever this is the place of the wanderers, and it's directly related to the children in their dispersion, right? But your wanderers or wanderings shall forget. If loyal zeal and love dethrone each idol from its seat, Father of mercies, lo, we come, subdued by thy call. O let the hand of grace divine reduce and bless us all. So will we teach the world that love, which we are made to see, and wanderers shall with us return and bless themselves with thee. And that's from Dodderidge, who I'm not sure who that is, but I think it's a nice poem. And with that, I believe that is the end of this lecture. Yes, it is. And we'll continue with the next one next time we get the chance to. Until then, I hope this was edifying for everyone and that you all have a great day. Okay, thank you and shalom.